Hello, Milwaukee Bucks fans. Welcome back to another episode of Bucks Latest presented by FanArch. I'm your host, Dean Simon. Before we get into everything, please remember to tell me what you think about this episode later on in the comments, and also hit that subscribe button. We are still very much on the road to 1,000 subscribers, just crossed the 850 subscriber plateau, which is just absolutely ridiculous. Thank you very much to everyone who has done that so far, and to everyone who will. Also, turn on post notifications so you don't miss out on future episodes and future Milwaukee Bucks updates. All right, so I decided that I wanted to use kind of the first half of the episode, this first kind of portion of it, as a little bit of an exercise because we are obviously in the dog days of the NBA offseason. It doesn't really seem like things are going up from here in terms of new news and new updates. And really, a big part of what we have to rely on are different writers and different talking heads coming up with different trade ideas and proposals and different packages that mostly involve Giannis, and that could not be more, or it could not have been more amplified than this offseason, seeing all the Giannis trade rumor stuff, especially when it was more real through the beginning portion of the offseason. But now, as we are about to enter September and the final month of the offseason before, the preseason begins and training camps officially start, we've just been seeing more and more Giannis trade rumors, and I kind of wanted to use this as an exercise to see how crazy they can get. So I found one specific Giannis related trade proposal, trade rumor that I really wanted to touch on today. Again, just to see how crazy these things can get, and also another trade that we're going to get into in the very, very near future. But anyways, this first trade pitch, this first proposal is from Bleacher Report's Andy Bailey, and he basically came out with an idea that used five different teams, 10 different players, and more picks than you could have ever imagined could be involved in a single trade. They're all there. And this proposal includes the Milwaukee Bucks losing Giannis Antetokounmpo and Bobby Portis to receive, again, from a myriad of teams, Andrew Wiggins, Terry Rozier, Harrison Barnes. Those are just the players. And then the picks go, bear with me, 2026 first rounder from the Knicks via the Wizards, a 2030 first round pick from the Heat, 2030 first round pick swap from the Knicks, 2032 first round pick swap from the Knicks, 2032 first round pick from Miami, top 50 protected 2031 second round pick from Utah, and three second round picks from New York. And then this trade also included Laurie Markkinen to San Antonio, Karl Anthony Towns to the Heat, and Bobby Portis landing with the Jazz, among others, joining him in Utah. So, first takeaways here. Of course, this is all to get Giannis to land with the Knicks, as this has been the main thing that's kind of been regurgitated around around NBA media with regard to Giannis trades, his potential destinations. A lot of different places want him with New York. And of course, these are for obvious reasons, is because a guy like Giannis, it feels as though he, just a guy of his skill level in general is just destined for a market like New York. And people can't stand to see him with playing in a market like Milwaukee, and they need him to get out of there for their own sake and to make them happy. But Giannis truly will never be a member of the New York Knicks based on their cap situation, their financial flexibility, or non flexibility, and just overall their situation with paying guys like Jalen Brunson and Towns and Mikal Bridges and Anunoby and Hart for years on end now, that they're going to be stuck with their core roster. And the only way that Giannis would be able to go to New York is through a Karl Anthony Towns trade, which just doesn't seem likely at the moment, if at all. So, just the hoops that these different websites and publications are going to jump through to get Giannis to the Knicks or to the Lakers or wherever, it's absolutely ridiculous. And not saying because with the NBA, especially in recent years, anything can happen. But this is one of those things where it's just, you gotta you see it, you say, wow, we're really at that part of the offseason, and you move on. So that's all I really wanted to do with that specific trade idea or proposal, and there's not really much more to it than that. But now the second one is a little bit more realistic, but also not, just considering the position that the Dallas Mavericks are in right now. And here, let me get into the specifics. So, this idea comes from Thomas Corelli of Sports Illustrated, and it has Kyle Kuzma going to the Dallas Mavericks in exchange for PJ Washington and Najee Marshall, two extremely talented and valuable wings for the Dallas Mavericks that, there have been recent reports coming out that PJ Washington is probably going to get extended by the Dallas Mavericks. And of course, they'd like to keep Najee Marshall after the great season that he just had. And I feel like people don't realize, and maybe this is just me talking because Najee Marshall has been probably one of my favorite players to watch this past season. He had a stretch later in the season. This is post All-Star break, maybe between March and April, where Najee Marshall was probably the best scorer on the Dallas Mavericks for like a month straight, where he was averaging 19 points, and there was a stretch of maybe a week or two where he was averaging like 26 points a game. And something that I love about Najee Marshall is not just his defensive impact, but when he wants to be a scorer, and in certain instances, he really can prove to be a guy where you need a bucket, you go to Najee Marshall, as crazy as that sounds, because he has this right hand floater that seems to go in 94% of the time, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So, Kuz for PJ Washington and Najee Marshall, in and of itself, this move really not likely to happen at all. And there was a part of the article that was mentioning this trade that basically said if John Horst was able to get on the phone with Nico Harrison and there was a possibility for this move to happen, get it done and hang up the phone and lose his number and all that, because that would just be highway robbery for the Milwaukee Bucks. From the perspective of the Dallas Mavericks for a swap for Kuzma in exchange for PJ Washington and Najee Marshall, the only way that you could look at this is the Dallas Mavericks would think, okay, we're not going to have Kyrie Irving for the next year. Maybe we're not as faithful in Cooper Flag just really being that or secondary or tertiary scoring option next to Anthony Davis and to Klay Thompson. Maybe we need a guy like Kyle Kuzma to take on more of the offensive brunt, to take on more of the scoring load. But it wouldn't really make sense in terms of their overall team construction, because that's what you have Klay Thompson there for as he's getting older and he's losing his edge a little bit on the defensive end. That's what you have Anthony Davis for if he can be healthy. That's what you have Kyrie for. So losing two of their more solid wing defenders in a trade like this for Kyle Kuzma, who shot maybe 0.04% from the field in the postseason for the Bucks, that would not be ideal. And I don't think, just in and of itself, this move, the Mavericks somehow deciding that Kyle Kuzma is the answer to their problems, and at the cost of guys like Najee Marshall and PJ Washington, who, for PJ Washington specifically, who proved to be such a valuable piece on a run to the NBA Finals, that you would just give him up like that for Kyle Kuzma doesn't really make sense. But especially if this trade were coming from a Milwaukee Bucks fan or supporter, sympathizer, you would like for there to be a little bit more hope and optimism that a trade like this could go through, but it really, really does not seem like it. Moving forward, taking a little break from the trade related stuff with regard to the Milwaukee Bucks, is that Amir Coffey, who was brought in, of course, as a free agent this summer from the Los Angeles Clippers, he has been tagged as the potential PJ Tucker replacement by Fansided's Dalton Sell, who I've covered his stuff a lot on this channel, and I really suggest that you go and check out his stuff. He's a great author. But he has given Amir Coffey the label as potentially being the PJ Tucker replacement, and that, oh yeah, the Bucks have needed a player like PJ Tucker for a little while. And it's very interesting to me because clearly Amir Coffey and PJ Tucker are very different players in terms of their overall makeup. That Amir Coffey is more offense focused and just more offensively skilled and versatile. And he obviously, both players great in catch and shoot situations, but Amir Coffey, what makes him stand out on the offensive end is that he can do so much more after the catch, that he can attack closeouts and get all the way to the rim and go up for dunks. And he's a much more polished offensive player. And that's very easy to see just watching highlight tapes of either of these players. But PJ Tucker, of course, could offer so much more versatility on the defensive end. So that, I believe, is what Dalton Sell is trying to say, that though Amir Coffey is the much more versatile offensive player, maybe there's a chance that the Bucks coaching staff and Doc Rivers can kind of hammer it into him that we're going to need you to be a little bit more of a versatile and dependable option on defense. And of course, that's what Amir Coffey wants to do. You would imagine that he wants to be an impactful player, a two-way player, and that's what he showed for good stretches during last season. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. I just don't love the comparison because Amir Coffey is just much more of a agile player, and it's like I can't really see PJ Tucker in Amir Coffey, but I understand the comparison. It's just it's not really what I would expect as the PJ Tucker replacement. But Dalton Sell says, and I quote on this topic: "For several years, the Milwaukee Bucks have been trying to find a player capable of replicating what PJ Tucker brought during his lone year with the team. None have been successful thus far, but they are hoping that recent signee Amir Coffey, who is set to don the same number 17 that Tucker did, maybe that's where he can see a little bit of the similarity just because they're wearing that same jersey, can be the one to break the trend." And, the more I say it, the more I'm really standing firm on this idea that they are just different players, that Coffee is much more versatile as a scorer, mostly because of how his handle and how he can get into the mid range, hit fadeaways when you really need him to. And he's just the much more athletic option, and hopefully he can flash a little bit of something on the defensive end too to counteract, or not to counteract that, but to build on top of his impressive offensive year from last year. If he can hit his threes at a north of 40% clip, and also have a, I'm not the biggest advanced stat guy, but I know having maybe a 108 to 111 defensive rating per 100 possessions, that's a number where you want to be around. If Amir Coffey can have maybe a 110 defensive rating per 100 possessions, not like that's blowing other guys out of the water, but that would be a good number for him to hit. And in terms of other defensive metrics, maybe a positive defensive box plus minus, if that's in his cards for the future, that could mean a lot of positive things for the Bucks and their perimeter defense specifically. And finally, just dipping our feet back into the trade stuff for one more moment, is there's a lot of stuff about Anfernee Simons of the, well, now newly of the Boston Celtics, coming out that the Philadelphia 76ers, that the Denver Nuggets are looking to be interested in getting into the hunt for Anfernee Simons, and that has both been reported by several different outlets and also refuted by several outlets. So it's not like it's set in stone that both of those teams or any other suitors are really going to make a huge run. But HoopsWire's Sam Amico also basically confirmed, not confirmed because you don't really know what the Bucks front office is thinking, but said that the Bucks are a team that will try to make a run at Anfernee Simons prior to the beginning of training camp. And the one reason, other than the fact that the Celtics just brought in Simons and maybe they're not looking to move him immediately because he's got an expiring deal, or maybe that's more of a motivation to move him. But other than that, that the deal would likely again bring in up Kyle Kuzma. It would take the salary of Kyle Kuzma and a guy like Ajax essentially, because, and the one reason I say this is because every other player that's on the team basically just re-signed with the team or re-upped on a new deal, and that's made them not tradable until the December 15th deadline, or not deadline. That's when most of the players on the team's trade restriction is lifted. So if the Bucks were looking to make a move prior to or during training camp, they would have to include guys that are, available to be traded rules wise. And those two guys are Kyle Kuzma and Ajax, or if you want to go further down the list, a guy like Tyler Smith. So those are really their only options. And would the Boston Celtics accept Kyle Kuzma and Ajax for Anfernee Simons? Not necessarily. I don't think that's plausible for the Milwaukee Bucks. As much as they'll likely, and of course draft capital can be included with this in total, but even for a team like Boston who's trying to move around as much money as they possibly can and bring in draft capital while they're taking their gap year, we'll see if it actually turns into a gap year or whether they'll be competitive or not. But going into what will likely be a gap year for a team that's trying to save as much money as possible and build for the future somewhat in a little short retooling period, uh, even a trade like this, even if you threw in that 2031 pick, maybe that's the only way that Boston would be convinced to do a deal like this, just because Kuzma and Ajax themselves would not get a deal across the table. It would have to take one of the most valuable picks in the league that's been eyed by plenty of teams before and will be eyed by plenty of teams leading up to the trade deadline. That's what it would take to get a deal done of this nature. But anyways, that'll be it for me today. Thank you very much again for tuning into another episode of Bucks Latest presented by FanArch. Again, I've been Dean Simon. Make sure to like, leave a comment, tell me what you think. Would the Bucks be in the market to get guys like PJ Washington or Najee Marshall, or bring in a guy like Anfernee Simons to take on more of that dominant on-ball scoring role, a la Chris Middleton, but with way less defense? Would that happen? Let me know in the comments, and also press that big red subscribe button down below. Still trying to get to 1,000. Also, turn on post notifications so you don't miss another future episode. Okay, I think that covers everything. I will see you guys in the next one. Go Bucks.